Thank you all. We are so excited to be hosting this amazing therapist, author, honestly, just kind of overall badass from what I've seen in the last little bit. Dr. Ramani Durvasula wrote, "It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People," and I'm sure some of you own some of her other books as well. Tonight's a really special night just because I'm sure you're all here for a similar reason, and that is to learn more about narcissism and narcissistic people. So I hope that you enjoy the talk, and we will be doing a Q&A, so start thinking about those questions because that will be the focus of the program. All right. Dr. Ramani Durvasula is a licensed clinical psychologist, professor emerita of psychology at California State University, Los Angeles, and the founder and CEO of Luna Education, Training, and Consulting. She discusses narcissism on her popular YouTube channel, on social media at Dr. Ramani, on her popular online program on healing from narcissistic abuse, and as the host of the podcast, Navigating Narcissism with Dr. Ramani. This is her fourth book. Let's give her a round of applause.
So this all feels very narcissistic to me. A curtain and a stage and the whole thing. So the irony is not lost on me. At least it's purple. Anyone who has read the book knows about that. Thank you so much. And good evening, Washington, D.C. Thank you. If ever there was a city that needed this, I thought L.A. was bad. You win. You win. Okay? So thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to open up on two comments, which I think first many of you will relate to, I hope, or you're going to think I'm incredibly neurotic, and then something else that I want to transfer to the book. So tonight I went to the wrong bookstore, and I'm here with one of my dearest friends, Helen Sue, who's an author and a psychologist, and she met me in the lobby of the hotel. I'm like, I'm going to be on time, and I show up to the wrong place. And it all speaks to how we hold the invalidating voices of the narcissistic relationships in our body. I made a mistake. I was about to let people down. I failed. And it speaks to how embodied what these relationships does to, I'm going to hold this in my hand. There we go. How embodied how these relationships are for us, because I literally felt like I was turning to liquid inside. I was the little girl. I did it wrong. I was wide-eyed. I couldn't even order an Uber. Helen miraculously is like, no, I got it. And so it's that sense of I failed, right? And I think that that's such an important moment to reflect on, because what these relationships do to us is when we even make the smallest mistake. In fact, I met a lovely woman on the way in, and she was reluctant to come in because she was here with her kids, right? And I mean, once she's like, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't be in here. I said, why? And the apologies we make for everything we do, the complete utter panic we feel when we feel like we've made a mistake. These wounds, we carry them, and I have to say, I think we carry them always. And what do we always say is the antidote to having gone through an invalidating relationship? Is supportive voices. I was fortunate. I had a dear friend with me tonight, and she caught me, and she very calmly converted the situation. And by the time we got here, I was like, it's going to be okay. My team reached out to me, and it was fine. And the folks here were nice about it. But the initial panic is not only I failed, but something terrible is going to happen. And for many of us who grew up in family systems like this or in relationships like this, one mistake meant we would lose love, or we would face rage, or we would be invalidated, or we would be told we're foolish. And those wounds, I mean, I just literally had this 10 minutes ago, how embodied it was. I became a failing 8-year-old child. And so I'm here to tell you, even as recently as tonight, I understand how deep this runs. The second thing that I bring into this conversation was an interview I did with somebody yesterday on authenticity. His podcast was on authenticity, and that's what we focused on. But the issue was how difficult it is or what happens to us when we try to bring our authentic selves into the world after it was so negated in the narcissistic relationship. In essence, our authentic self had to die in that relationship. It doesn't really die. It just almost goes into this sort of period of latency in the relationship. But if you bring your authentic self forward, it doesn't work in the relationship. So, and that ends up creating a ripple effect and the rest of your social support network. So there's a sort of fear around seeing these relationships clearly and all that goes along with it. And then yesterday was a busy day. And yesterday, someone else said, well, okay, so just tell me how I can identify someone as narcissistic and get them out of my life. I'm like, oh, no. So we're not playing that game. Because a lot of people take umbrage at that, and I understand that. Because this idea of like, okay, I just need to know definitively, I can slap a label on this person, right? And then I can dismiss them. It doesn't work that way. These are our parents. These are our siblings. These are our partners and people we're raising kids with and our friends. They could be our colleagues. None of us have the luxury of doing that. And so this is much more about giving ourselves permission to identify patterns. And by now you could probably recite them chapter and verse. You know, it's not just about the lack of empathy and the selfishness and the entitlement and the validation seeking and all that stuff that shows up as the manipulation and the gaslighting and the blame shifting. It's that this is a pattern and it is not going to change. And there was an article that came out in the New York Times in July, and they were referencing a published article. The article came out from a group of researchers in Europe, but it was what we call in science a meta-analysis. They looked at many, many studies. And they finally gave me the data that I was so glad somebody was documenting in this way. Narcissism's a stable trait, and it doesn't change. So if any of you are saying, well, show me the science, I'll show you the science. We've always known it. We've got the data. And so what it means, though, is that we know that these antagonistic patterns don't change. We also know that attachment matters to us. And so we make the accommodations within ourselves to make this relationship work, to stay attached, to feel like we have a sense of belonging with a community, with a tribe, call it what you will, and that we blame ourselves, and that's how these relationships sustain. So It's Not You was an attempt to write a book about healing, but a book about healing that was compassionate, not just for what we went through in the relationship, but in a strange way, even for what that relationship was about. It wasn't about enabling it. It wasn't about giving someone a free pass. In fact, I was asked to do a documentary recently. And the documentary is about a person who had perpetrated I think a crime, but ultimately wasn't arrested for that crime. But basically what they did, and the person was narcissistic, I would say malignant, narcissistic, psychopathic. And the documentary makers wanted to write a compassionate view. They wanted to sell a compassionate view of that person. And basically the story they wanted to tell is, well, this person who's still blame shifting, still denying the harm they've done, and can we write a compassionate view of it? And I said, I'm going to take a pass on that one because I'm tired of this. I am tired at the number of resources and effort that goes into trying to humanize someone that has harmed us, or in this case, harmed other people, but yet far less effort is put into humanizing the experience of a survivor of one of these relationships, and instead it's a lot of clucking about like, oh, come on, like, don't label, or it can't be that bad, or you know, you didn't leave yet, or why didn't you leave if it was so bad, and you only have one mother. So these are the paradigm shifts. Well, you've heard that one, right? You only have one mother, and like, don't I have, this is the difference between dating and parents. You're like, there is no Hinge for parents. I'm like, I would not have swiped on one of my parents. I can tell you that right now. And so it's but it's that, and then what happens though is, and yesterday I did a conversation with David Kessler on the Dr. Ramani Network. I don't know if any of you saw it, but if any of you did, it was actually a really powerful conversation about what I think is sort of a central core issue in healing from these relationships, which is grief. And grief is that processing of loss, right? And I think David says that, that, you know, all trauma involves grief, but not all grief involves trauma. But the fact of the matter is that these relationships are trauma. They're a betrayal trauma. And that conversation about betrayal and betrayal trauma, we don't think about what happens in a family of origin as betrayal. Unless there's severe abuse, we often reserve that term for infidelity, for example, right? My partner cheated on me, that's a betrayal. No, a betrayal is when you love someone and they're not fulfilling, as Dr. Jennifer Fried puts it, the duties of a relationship, which is trust, safety, empathy, compassion, respect. For a child, that is, above all else, safety, consistency, attunement, availability. If those things aren't there, it's a betrayal because you've come to trust in that relationship. You believe in that relationship. And for the longest time, we didn't clock betrayal as a trauma, but that's the core of what happens in these relationships. So that, going back to the grief, is what we lose. We lose trust. We lose hope. We lose faith. We lose belief in ourselves. But the belief is, if we can find that in community, you look around this room, you're not alone in this, right? If you can find that in community, if you can get that validating voice, this book was my attempt to put one validating voice into the world. That becomes the essence and the core of healing. It really is, it's not you, and that's not meant to be dismissive. That's never been the point. It's not dismissive. It's saying that you showed up as your best self, and you did everything you can. You tried to prove your love to someone. And we're given the sort of sense that this is not enough, but it wasn't never about it not being enough. That's a them thing. And by them not taking responsibility for doing that work and being aware of the other, whatever it was in their narcissistic dynamics, you were left holding a bag that leads a 58-year-old woman to almost have a panic attack in front of a bookstore tonight because she was so afraid someone was going to yell at her. That's how we hold this. And so that's what the hope was in this book. So I'm going to, in the spirit of this being a bookstore and talking about a book, I'm going to read to you a couple of parts of the book, which sort of front and back, which mean something to me. And then I'd like to open it up for questions, because I know a lot of you have questions about, that, and I think that a lot of us will resonate with those questions. So I'm going to at least talk about the book, because that would seem very silly if I came all this way. I had to familiarize myself with my book again. And so, no, I'm kidding. I literally have to refer to it all the time. And so I'm going to open with the preface, and many of you have heard this preface. But I think it's so important we do start here, because, first of all, it's hard for me to read this part of the book, so it just forces me to do something. But I also think it grounds us in a universality, because every one of us could hear yourself in this preface. And if you haven't read the book yet, that'll ground you to the beginning of the book. So give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay. Once upon a time, an 8-year-old girl sat on the floor of a stuffy cafeteria in an elementary school in New England and watched as a troupe of circus performers from New York City gave a show at her school. It was the 1970s, an era before any kind of multicultural awareness, and the little girl with her foreign name, brown skin, and too tight braids in her hair had taught herself to be invisible. The circus chose their volunteers from the gaggle of children, one boy to be an elephant, a girl to be a juggler's assistant. The luckiest boy was a ringmaster. And finally, the circus folks held up a costume. It was satin, a deep shade of purple, festooned with fringe and sequins. All of the girls swooned, including the little girl with the braids. Every girl's hand shot up except hers. "Pick me, please, pick me, please," they shrieked. How did they have the courage, thought the girl with the braids. Why weren't they afraid? The head of the troupe ignored the children with their hands up and chose the little girl with the braids. She trembled and put her head down, tears welling up, and quietly said, "No, thank you, sir." He looked at her and gently asked, "Are you sure?" And she quietly nodded. The girl sitting next to her grabbed at the opportunity and wore that costume with pride. He asked the girl with the braids what part she wanted, and she said she would be content as the part of the horse's costume where she would be hidden. She would spend years thinking about what it would have felt like to wear that purple sequined wonder of a dress, but that day she was so frightened of the taunts of her classmates and simply of being seen. From the very beginning of her life, she had internalized the message that her wants, dreams, and needs weren't worthy of being seen, and that she wasn't enough. Her kind and compassionate mother's dreams had been thwarted and silenced, and the little girl felt that she didn't have the right to them either, until she did. And while I still may not own a purple sequin dress, though I do own a purple shirt, I recognize that we can pull ourselves out of the stories of the narcissistic people who defined us, silenced us, clipped our wings, taught us our dreams were grandiose, filled us with shame, and for a time stole our joy. That we can have love stories, success stories, and happiness, yet comprehend that there will still be dark nights of the soul, and that the shadow of self-doubt remains a fellow traveler. And we can pay it forward and let folks know that what happened was real, and that they are enough. I did, and every day I see more and more people who do. We can begin to break intergenerational cycles of devaluation and invalidation and psychological self-harm. These stories must be told. I still don't know if I would have the courage to grab hold of that spangled dress today, but I'd like to think that the little girl with the braids and the big brown eyes and the name no one can pronounce would have rocked it. And from my little girl heart to all of you, I know you can too. So, it's moderately inconceivable that that little girl is on this stage, but indeed she is. And I have to say that this process of doing the work, ironically, it wasn't even my personal story that led me to do this work. It was a research interest in narcissism, because I felt like nobody was studying it, because nobody wants to study it in the world of mental health, because it's messy. And in many ways, we have turned the narcissists into our heroes. So for anyone to study narcissism meant you have to be willing to dismantle the people who are being put forth as leaders and the people we aspire to be, which is not okay. The next piece of this, though, was recognizing how many people were being harmed by this. And that's what led me to do this work. It wasn't until years later I was like, ooh, okay. And in fact, my therapist accused me of staying in a narcissistic relationship 2 years longer than necessary. She said, were you just doing research? Because you are about that efficient. And so I said, yeah, maybe so. Well, I said, at least thank you for giving meaning and purpose to the nightmare that was that relationship. So I would love, though, to switch to questions. I'll definitely, and as I answer your questions, bring it back to the book, and then there'll be a signing afterwards, and they'll keep us on schedule here. But I really want to make this event not just about me yammering at you, but an evening that captures the things that are on your mind. So thank you for giving me this attention, and I'd love to open up to your questions. And I think there's someone with a mic who's sort of floating around, though there's like a big bright light in my face, so I can't really see, but yes. Yes, I think I see a hand up here.
All right.
Yeah. Hi, I just had a question. I've been in a narcissistic relationship for about 10 years, and just recently I started having like short-term memory loss, and just wondering if that's associated with the abuse.
So in case everyone couldn't hear, someone's sharing they've been in a narcissistic relationship for 10 years and now experiencing some level of short-term memory loss. And could that be related? Absolutely. And let me tell you why. Let's just take the experience of a narcissistic relationship where you're constantly on edge. Over time, we are sort of in a trauma alert state, right? We never quite feel safe. We never quite feel in our bodies, and we're constantly hypervigilant, right? And we're often hyper-constricted. If I say this, there's going to be a blow-up. If I say this, they're going to give me the silent treatment. If I do this, so you're constantly playing this chess game, right? Like, better not say this, I better not do this, on and on and on, right? All of that vigilance, all of that self-monitoring, and all of the chaos that these relationships create are creating this terrible sense of stress around you. But it's not just regular stress. It's a stress that undercuts a sense of safety. So we know that what traumatic stress, especially betrayal trauma, and especially interpersonal stress, which really is almost a multiplier on all of this, is going to distract us above all else. We ruminate. How many of you ruminated all the time when you were in a narcissistic relationship? You just played it on a continual loop, like, wait a minute, did I say? And you're looking through the text messages and you're like, huh? Like it's a constant, right? You're constantly second guessing yourself. And in a weird way, cell phones have been a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing because you're like, no, I did explain this. So we have that written record, but it also gives us something to sort of ruminate about. So when we are in that much of a sort of a hyper aroused state, we don't process information in the same way. And because we don't process information the same way, part of what happens is we don't remember, right? Think of your brain as a computer. If you can't attend and bring it's like you didn't enter the keystrokes in, right? It doesn't get entered. We don't encode it, so then we don't remember it. And then when you add also that there's actually, frank, memory impairment that comes when we're under this much stress, it tracks. And the problem is this idea of I can't remember stuff leaves us feeling as though there's something wrong with us. And the narcissistic person can jump on it, gaslight us and say, well, see, you never remember anything. And now the gaslighting feels plausible because it's playing on that. And I'll say number two, your memory may not be as bad as you think. Some of this may be the narcissist sharing a party line with you, like you don't remember stuff anymore. But it's because they're selling you a fiction. So when you put those two things together, a lot of people sense that's happening. And what does happen for some people, and it may not be an option for you, but they will find that when the relationship's not in their life anymore, things sort of come, so it's not a frank memory impairment, but that sort of stress that's literally pulling you out of your body and keeping you hypervigilant, now all of a sudden you're focused in a different way. And I wouldn't be surprised, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there are areas of your life where you feel like your memory's working fine. And this is where we see this mixed competency picture. People will say, you know what? I go to work and I'm badass at work. Like I'm getting stuff done and I'm like good. And then I come home and I look like I'm sort of a lost soul in some sort of sad Victorian novel. And like you can't reconcile these two things because you are competent, right? And in a way, it's threatening to show up as your competent self in the narcissistic relationship because that competent self is dangerous in that relationship. And that's where I'm saying your sympathetic nervous system's like, honey, let's just keep competent you away because we don't need the fight tonight. And so then, but that also contributes to you saying, no, I'm remembering fine here, but it's here. But it's that interpersonal stress that happens in this relationship that really leaves people feeling like they're on back foot. So the answer, yes. So we could have done that real quick. Yep. I hope that answers your question.
I'm excelling at work.
Yep.
The highest ratings, doing my job excellently, not to brag, but I.
Yep. But that's the thing, this competent self. Yep. In the relationship. Because it's and in a way what happens, in order to keep a narcissistic relationship going, we have to be moderately dissociated all the time. Because if we were all in emotionally, we would be devastated. And for people who grow up with narcissistic parents, you actually do have this sort of, this outside, very competent self, and this inside imposter self. Like you're always working harder and harder and harder to sort of feel like you're the real deal because you got the message that you're not. And that constant tension of what you sort of experience as these fragmented competent and incompetent selves is in many ways sort of the burden that survivors face in these relationships. Your memory will come back. The less time you spend with this person, the more your memory is going to be fine. It's like we feel like we have dementia and then this person goes away and it's like a dementia cure, which means it's not dementia. Or maybe it's the dementia being in a narcissistic relationship. Any other questions? Thank you, Lori.
Hi. So I am coming out, I think, of a narcissistic relationship. I share a child with this person, and the child is a baby, so the child is not of age to communicate with his parent. My question is how to pretty much deal with co-parenting with this particular individual. We'll have conversations face-to-face, and then when he's text messaging me, the context of the messages are totally different than what we discussed face-to-face, almost as if he's trapping me or trying to hem me up. Do you have any suggestions for how to maneuver?
So you're saying you have a conversation that's off text, that's one thing, and then in text, it's something entirely different.
Correct.
Right? And so, and then what ends, in an example of this, what ends up being the resolution? Do you go with the thing that's written? I mean, it probably ends up in a place you don't want it to be.
It definitely goes to a place where I don't want it to be. What I usually do to try to protect myself is in the message, in a text message, I will restate what was discussed
Yeah.
face to face and kind of tell this person, you just said this yesterday and now you're saying this via text.
Okay, no, we're gonna clean this up, okay? We're not doing this anymore. Stop engaging with this person. None of this, you said this yesterday, you said that. Stick to the facts, right? This is almost like detective show time, right? You are not, because this isn't about them. Remember what the don't go deep paradigm I give? Don't defend, don't explain, don't
Yes.
engage, don't personalize. You're explaining, okay? We're not gonna do that anymore. You know what you go right back. It's almost like you restate the original, premise, whatever that is. This is gonna happen at this time, and they completely ignore it. You're not gonna say, I said this to you, You're gonna repeat it again. Now, whereas in a case like yours, and you said you're still in this relationship, are you married, or are you in a co-parenting agreement?
So we're not married. We're strictly co-parenting at this point. We're not in a relationship. We broke up about 5 months ago, but things are progressively getting worse. When I don't feed into his demands, that's when it's like the gaslighting. I'm now being financially abused. Things are getting worse.
So they are going to get worse because the control piece was the communication around your child. Remember, you're supply. And your child is also supply in the sense of it gets more control over you. When we talk about supply, one of the big sources of narcissistic supply is the capacity to have power, domination, and control in a relationship. And you're slipping away, especially the more you're sort of sticking to the facts, right? There's less emotion. So he's finding different ways to punish you. It might be financially, all the rest of it. But and are you having to go through family court on this one?
It's leading to that at this point now, yes.
So what's going to happen is a couple of things. As you get to family court, you want to be clear as hell about what you want this to look like, because the more it gets codified in a parenting agreement, the more you've got something to work with, number one. Number two, there are literally apps out there that become part of the court record. And there's a reason for that, because then they know they're on watch. So if they write this loony stuff, the court's getting this transcript. Okay, so one's called My Family Wizard. The other one's called Talking Parents. They both have the same kind of an outcome. But I would keep it tighter. No, don't say, but you said this yesterday, because what you're doing is you're pointing out is gaslighting to him. No gaslighter is going to clean up their act because we pointed out to them. They're just going to get more frothed up, right? So you're literally trying to trim out all of the emotion from the conversation, because that's all that's going to work going forward. You also want to sadly have to document the hell out of this, because if it does come down to inconsistencies, you at least have that as an evidence base. But in terms of your own sanity, that there is gaslighted, right? You know what that looks like. But pointing it out to him is actually just going to start this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And you're no longer talking about the initial situation. Above, like this. Okay, like a singer. Oh, nope, that even higher. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. It's like I'm hugging it, or. Okay, there, got it. All right. So does that make sense? So I would cut down the engagement, because the more we try to point out to a narcissistic person sane communication, they're going to, now it's like, it's sort of, they enjoy the sparring. They really do, and you don't. You're trying to stick to the facts. And as this thing deteriorates, though, you have to be prepared for that. You have to be prepared for that financially. That's why I'm saying when this does go to family court, it will get ugly first, and don't think family court's going to be on your side. If you go to family court, do not use the word narcissistic. Do not use the word gaslighting. Promise me that. Those words will always come back and bite you. The court will view you as the problem. So stick to patterns of behavior. Describe the patterns of behavior. Save all those text messages, but do not use those words.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I mean, family court's its own hell.
Y'all
when it
are out
comes to
here
this.
getting legal advice. We might need to
No,
pay
I
her a
mean-
rate.
Oh my God. I feel like I'm having a parasocial relationship moment with you right now.
That's great.
and
I love
just
that.
learned that term
And I'm
today.
an introvert, so this is great. Like, we get to have a friendship and I don't have to leave the house. Great.
I'm like, yo, you have been so instrumental. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist,
Oh, great.
and also a doctor who does a lot of couples therapy and coaching and all the things. And am still in very deep recovery from my own relationship with, I thought was the first narcissist, but now I know it was not. She was not the first one, 3 years ago. And shit is still coming up. So I'm having such a difficult time. Like, you got me in tears, like, in the first 5 minutes of you talking, just about, like, how we know these things and how much we ignore patterns and overlook things, and then, like, the bleeding hearts of us therapists, and everyone has trauma and that, you know, whatever, all that bullshit. Has gotten me, had me hooked.
Yeah.
Right. And then I thought, in my attempt at doing my work as a facilitator of healing of others, like, realizing, oh shit, you have a whole lot of your own stuff that you've been ignoring. So that's, like, the root of my question, because I now am a parent of 2 by virtue of me trying to do some healing of trauma, and just got myself re-traumatized with a baby who's about to be 1 on Saturday.
Happy birthday, baby.
After having an 8-year-old over here. So yeah, my question, my comment is, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
So much, all the personal parts, but specifically, I feel like I've become an expert on narcissistic recovery because of you.
Thank you.
And because of my own personal experience now. But, like, how do you do that work as a healer and as a person who is in the amazing work of, like, helping to bring other people through their transformations and all of that, when you are being activated and triggered and, you know, have your own shit coming up? I'm like, I get stuck there so much. So I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit, please.
This is a great question, and I think it goes beyond being a therapist, right? Because I think any one of us has been through this. It breaks our heart to watch other people go through this. And in fact, many times we'll watch other people who are in their own situations. You're saying, oh my gosh, I want to help them. I want to get them out. And, you know, we recognize that everyone does this in their own time, right? So it's not just those of us who do this for a living. It's any of us who have people close to us. We might even sometimes be part of a narcissistic family system and see siblings that are still really locked into the machine and getting harmed and getting stuck. And it's as though we're throwing out life preservers and they're drowning and they're not taking them. And if we jump in the water, we're going to drown with them. So to that point, remember how people heal. And this is a big piece of the work on betrayal trauma. People heal in community. And the way we do therapy is very arrogant. We assume it's individual. We look at who comes into therapy? The person who was harmed by the narcissist. The narcissistic person's not coming to therapy. So what do? We pathologize the person who's coming to them. Well, let's see what's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you. You were in a messed up relationship. The person who did this to you, you want to talk about what's wrong? I can do that. But you're having a normal reaction to doing someone doing effed up stuff to you. So let's lift this disease model. It shouldn't be different. If anyone's like, nah, I got this. This person validating me, gaslighting me, manipulating me, and shifting blame. That's cool. No, that's even worse. I'm like, oh my gosh, come back. We need you back into reality, right? So I think that when we recognize healing is happening in community, in many ways, that ability to be in the space with somebody and recognize that this is healing, right? Even online, it's healing. One-on-one is healing. What Helen did for me in the bookstore was healing. It's happening all the time. And that becomes the reminder of how much that the counterweight to what narcissism is, which often, think about it, folks, think about it. I write this in the book and I've said it repeatedly. We give 90% of ourselves to the most toxic relationships in our lives. The texts we're sending, did I check that? Did I double check that? Let me call them, let me make sure. And what do we not do? We don't put energy into the reciprocal, mutual, healthy relationships in our life. Why? Because those people aren't going anywhere. We don't call them for 6 months. They're like, hey, baby, how are you doing? I miss you. And I'm like, I have not called you in 6 months. They're like, that's okay. I love you. I should have been calling that person every day, not some deranged person who's like, well, why didn't you get that done for me? Right? And so, but that child's part of ourself that was trying to please someone unpleasable, or that even that part of us in a relationship where we were sold a bad bill of goods, that relationships are sacrifice. Who wrote that? Look, who says who? No, it's not. If this works well, it doesn't feel like sacrifice, right? I may make an accommodation in my life for you, but when I feel that's from time to time, this person is there with me and it's a back and forth, the word sacrifice doesn't come into the equation. So I think we're also sold this sense of relationships are hard. Don't walk away from the marriage because this is supposed to be tough and da, right? So how do I find it? Because I get to be in community with people, and I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that at all, but I know it's possible. And I know this is about education. And it sickens me that it is, what are we, 2024 now? I started doing this work like 2008, 2009, so 16 years. That before that, I felt like, literally, I still do. You should see my inbox, not pretty. A heretic. How dare you talk about this? And if I had a dime for every time somebody says, well, can you tell us how to heal the narcissist? I'm like, nah. How about we heal the people who've been affected by them? Why are you so obsessed with focusing on the abuser? It's almost like the whole world is caught up in this trauma bond of how do we save the people who oppress us? Focus on yourself first, folks. Yes, yeah, I don't know if I don't know if she has the mic. I think she's probably
Way in the back.
Oh, way in the back.
Way in the back.
I can't even see. I feel like Taylor
That's okay.
Swift. I'm like, what is how? I can't see anything. This room's confusing.
I'll try to make this condensed as possible. I'm asking this question, and if I cry, I'm so sorry.
Okay, we don't apologize for crying. That is what we do when we feel.
I'm asking this question on behalf of myself and my 2 toddlers. I'm so excited to read this book. I've read one of your previous ones. I'll just put it that I took the quiz on Is Your Partner a Narcissist? And he was off the charts.
Great.
I'm in a situation where I've spoken with multiple lawyers who say there's no way you'll get there's no way you'll get sole custody. No. So I'm in a shared custody. I don't feel it's safe to go that route. I'm just curious if you have any advice and resources for other moms who are going to have to live this day in and day out until we feel that it's safe enough to leave. One thing I do want to say is I really appreciate in your work that you don't judge folks who stay, and I think that's so important. I don't feel that I'm in a situation where my children are old enough to tell me what is going on in a home that I am not in. And so I just, kind of an open-ended question, but curious if you have any resources or advice for women who are, and men who are in the same situation that I'm in.
So I want to go back to one point, and then she raised something that I think everyone should hear if you're not aware of it. I would say 50% of people, especially in what you're describing, in a narcissistic, long-term committed relationship or marriage, don't leave for precisely the reasons you say, right? And so then there's this whole sense of like, so what, I'm forever caught in this purgatory-ish, not entirely, because now you know what you're up against, and you can really decathect your emotional you from this, like to recognize, I am in this because family court refuses to recognize the harms this it has for children. That's a reality, folks, okay? And I think a lot of people can't believe that's the reality, but that's the reality. And knowing that is why many people stay. And literally on the first day they could actually file and they know their kids are gonna be in a better place, or it's going to be safer for them, or the kids have more choice, or whatever it may be. But to your point, there is, I mean, in terms of resources for that, there are actually a lot of communities that are devoted to exactly what you're saying about people who are still navigating this process. I mean, one place I'd recommend is One Mom's Battle, but the trick with One Mom's Battle is a lot of those folks are in the divorce process and trying to navigate shared custody because they're just sort of, they're already underway kind of thing. So there you're going to find mixed support. We have our healing community, and you know, like I brought all this stuff to give all of you tonight, and I forgot. See, I'm a mess, and I'm so sorry. I had all this information to give, but if you do get a book, I can at least give you that information. I can't believe I forgot all that. But but if you come there, we'll see that we also have a lot of people in our community who are going through exactly what you're going through. What I would say to you, though, is don't view, I don't know how young your children are, but let's say they're 3. Don't say, oh, I'm in this, how old, say it again? 4 and 2. Okay, so don't approach this as I'm going through this for another 16 years. Break this into chunks. Quarters, 6 months, whatever, okay? Because that's what you're sort of striding, because your children are developing. Things are going to change, and you're getting into rhythms with your eyes wide open as to what this is about. Your attorney, those attorneys are giving you wise guidance. You're never going to get sole custody. And so, and the other thing you don't want to do is make that into too much of a fight in any of the conversations, right? One of the big mistakes people make when they're divorcing a narcissist is they go into it saying, I'm going to fight for these, I call it the mother lioness problem. Like, I'm going to fight for the kids. And now they realize that's where they've got you, right? And they're going to, even if they're not interested in being a parent, they're like, well, now I can really mess with you here, and they will. And I'm not saying one has to be fully indifferent, but in a way, you almost don't want to get into that conversation with them. And then at some point, you're going to go 6 months at a time, 6 months at a time, 6 months at a time. And this situation is going to shift. There's no two ways about it. But in terms of community, I'd say, again, I'm going to give you the info in our healing community because we've got a few thousand people, and some of them are exactly in this situation. They're staying and they're attempting to co-parent. Sometimes just talking to the people who are going through it, that's your richest resource, because I don't think anybody can talk about this unless they're going through it. With kids your age, even you talking to someone who's got a 10-year-old is not as relevant as talking to someone who's got a 2-year-old and how they're weathering the storm. And I know it feels like I'm asking you to put like a burden on yourself, but making notes, doing some documentation, because if the day ever comes that you decide to say, I'm not doing this, you have the documentation. You can't do that backwards. The more you keep that in real time, the stronger an argument you might be able to make should the time come you decide to leave. But the other thing you need is to be taken care of for yourself, and that means oftentimes therapy. Even if all you do in therapy is you scream about this person for 50 minutes, I don't think that's a waste of time. I work with clients where sometimes only once a month they're coming in, and they're really saying, unjust, angry, I can't believe, the whole thing. And so that just sort of helps them recoalesce. And if you can do that in group, like with other people going through it, and here's a last suggestion I'd make to you, and you might have to do it underground. If you can't find it, create it. And because I think that what we don't realize is, and if you look at Judith Herman's work on healing trauma, the last step for a person healing from trauma is to pay it forward. And that act of working, being that for others, I don't want to do that role too soon, but that you really do think about, I need this, can I create this? Use a pseudonym. It can be online, no names. And you might find that to be useful too. But the communities are there. It's about finding them. But if you can't find them, create them. And look at the existing communities out there to see if you can find this conversation. Because this is a rare group that comes together, which is the people who stay. The people who go have lots of groups. The people who stay don't have as much community. And many times, because they can't get out of the house, they can't. And so let everyone use a pseudonym. It's okay. You can construct that online, and I can even talk to you a little bit about how to do that. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Ramani. Can you see me here? Yeah. I might cry. Sorry.
Good.
I know I'm not supposed
no
to say
sorry.
I know.
No sorry.
You mentioned something about the last step of trauma. What is the first step of healing from trauma? I'm actually in a very confused state. I'm going through a divorce. I cannot reconcile the angel versus devil, or amazing versus monster situation here. I'm blindsided. I'm confused. I'm cognitive dissonance, everything. I don't, everything is spinning. Nothing makes sense. I looked at one of your videos about the final discard. I don't know if that's happening. I don't know what, I don't know how to accept this. I don't know how to handle the grief. So I've tried talking to a couple of therapists, and they're not specialized in this field, so it's a little bit of a struggle.
Can I ask you a question if you feel comfortable sharing it? Is the end of this relationship something you wanted, or is this something that the other person in the relationship is asking for?
At first, I wanted it, and somehow it turned around.
And now it seems like they want out.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you one more question, and please tell me to shut up if I'm being too intrusive.
Not
but
at all.
I'm trying to understand. Can I ask why you wanted out? Like, what was the catalyst to you wanting out?
How he was treating me was
Okay.
so unacceptable at so many levels, whether it's flying monkeys and, just the gaslighting, the verbal, mental, emotional, physical abuse, throwing things. It was pretty bad. In my culture, it's common, I guess. Unfortunately, but I won't limit this to culture because it's everywhere, it's universal. But and when I finally did take this step that, okay, I don't want to be in this anymore, he wasn't allowing it, and then tried to reconcile. And when I started to warm up to it, he's like, I'll change, I'll go to therapy, I'll do this, I'll do that. You'll get the old guy back, everything will be fine, we'll get through this. And right when I said, okay, fine, yeah. So
Okay.
that's where I
Got it.
Yeah.
And so now you've doubled down. He came back in, the whole thing, the future fake, the whole 9 yards. You're like, no,
Yeah.
I'm done. And that now he's embracing it, saying, bye, I'm good, bye. I don't want to be in this anymore. Yep?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things, because number one, I want us to reflect on the sheer amount of courage you had to say, I want out in the first place. Okay? I want you to sit with that. You're saying that culturally, these are they're indoctrinated patterns in your culture, that this is what relationships look like. To break out of that cycle and say, the way I was being treated is unacceptable. There's an incredibly healthy part of you and a self-advocating part that found its voice for a minute. It's there, okay? So remember that, number one. And then, of course, they do the things they do, the gaslight, the future fake, I'm going to change. You can have the old guy back. You don't want the old guy. You don't want the old guy, the medium guy, the new guy. No, like as though we want any part of this back, right? But there's that trauma-bonded part of us that wants it to work, right? That we had an investment in it, we attached to something in it. There were some elements we liked, and now it's the reality of it has hit, and there is a panic that comes from the moment when it's going to end. And we make we go to that place in our mind. What if I've made a mistake? These are all, again, I can't highlight how common these reactions are. So you're saying right now, I feel confused. I don't know if I'm coming and going. I'm remembering actually some good things about the relationship. Now they want to go. I don't know if I want this. So this kind of chaotic thinking we have in these relationships, there's a fancy psychological word for this, which are called dialectics, which is we think these relationships are either all good or all bad. That's how the trauma bond gets created, right? But the problem with these relationships is they aren't all good or they aren't all bad. They're complicated. They're people we've been with for a while. There were some good moments, or might have actually been an interesting moment in the beginning. There might be things that are still compelling. They may, I don't know, intelligent or great at conversation, yet they were invalidating and abusive and throwing things and left us feeling like crap. And so that big list means that we're living in this murk. And that's what it is. It's not clear. And then having to make decisions from this middle ground where we don't feel like we're allowed to do that. We're letting something go. Here's the only guarantees I can give you. He's never going to change. So this mess of this relationship and the way he behaves, it's always going to be that way. But this acute grief you're feeling, right? The so-called cutting of this trauma bond, it's like having a physiological part of you cut. And that kind of chaos, feeling dysregulated and then at times feeling numb, that's a normal traumatic response. And this is where, when we talk about therapies for trauma, you're saying, what's that first stage? It's stabilization. It's getting ourselves into that middle where we can actually sit with the awareness that this isn't going to change. That's not useful information if you feel like you're going back and forth. It's traditionally been called this thing called the window of tolerance. It's this thing in the middle, right, where we're regulated enough to see it clearly and say, got it. Okay? And so now I know it's not going to change, so I'm going to make my decisions accordingly. The woman in the back of the room said, I see this, I get this, but I can't leave because I don't want my kids with this person half the time, right? That's a rational decision. But when we're in the early stages, it doesn't feel rational. And this is where trauma therapy, whether it's EMDR, whether it's somatic work, whether it's internal family systems, whatever work we do can bring us sort of into that middle. But then we come back to that issue of community and having or being in a space of relationship where you're not betrayed. Sometimes therapy is that space, right? But having people around you where you realize you're not alone with this, some of that also helps bring your nervous system back down. And once you're there, you can make your decisions more clearly, but also process the grief more clearly. And I'm not saying there's an easy path forward, but you're asking for that first stage, it's stabilization. It's getting out of that bouncing between numbness and dysregulation and getting into that middle ground where you can actually feel more in your body and feel like you're making more clear choices. And that's often for a lot of folks going through these relationships, just getting to that point. And understanding, nope, this isn't going to change. But that part of you knew to get out under the worst of circumstances. That fragmented part of you has got to be brought in. Because there's a panicky part of you. They're all the same you. That's therapeutic work.
And
that really is.
How do you get to the stabilization point?
That I would say is very much trauma-informed work.
Okay.
Stuff that's going to bring you into this moment, like staying present. Because what trauma does is it pulls us out of now into the then, right? And our body is responding to the then. So we're not regulating in this moment. And so it becomes hard to do all the thinking work of healing from a narcissistic relationship, the it can't change and all that. Because unlike what we used to consider like sort of trauma as the person who mugs you in the street, right? Or something that happens maybe, or a natural disaster that wipes out your house. That kind of trauma is a different kind of healing process than this kind of interpersonal betrayal trauma that happens in a narcissistic relationship. And the world feels unsafe in a different way. So the approaches to that, being with a therapist who can hold that space for you, that validating space, but also feeling back in your body, those become really important steps. And that's where I'm saying the trauma-informed work will help you in a way that therapist doesn't even have to get the narcissistic piece. They have to get the trauma piece. It would be great if they did. Because once you feel more in that stable space, you can sort of see this clearly and make the decisions. And I'm going to be frank with you, this narcissistic soon-to-be ex-partner of yours, they're playing a game. Their sort of ability to be indifferent to you in a way is, again, it's playing on that trauma bond. What's the trauma bond? Back and forth, idealization, devaluation, good days, bad days, praise, criticism. And so it's very easy for a narcissistic person to click out of a relationship because they don't feel at the same level of depth. And so where our hearts are breaking, for them it's just sort of a disruption in supply. It's a very different process for them. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Ramani.
Hi.
Today is the 2-month anniversary of my divorce being finalized.
Congratulations.
Yay. After 21 years. And so I have to say a personal thank you to you for your videos, your book, the support, your healing program, which I am a part of,
Thank
has
you.
been so instrumental in helping me get through. My question is, I foolishly had thought that the attempts at stalking and cyberbullying would cease after the divorce, and it has escalated. So any tips that you have on how to cope with that? I've been debating on trying yet again to confront. Like, I would really appreciate it if you would stop trying to hack into my Messenger account, which worked one time for about 3 weeks, and then it picked back up. So that, among other things, hacking into emails, that I'm just kind of at a loss as to how to handle it. Do you advise confronting it head on or just trying to muddle through and pretend it doesn't happen. It's really disturbing because it is a violation of my privacy. And I have found that it's causing me to withdraw from other potential relationships because, I share with my friends, like, I don't know how private this call is. Nobody wants to talk to you if they can't be assured of, what they're saying to you is just between the two of you. So that's where I am now, but really glad to be out, and thank you.
Congratulations on being out, and I'm so sorry. I want to use her question as a jumping off point to talk about post-separation abuse, because we often talk about getting out of one of these relationships as some sort of gold standard. It ain't over then. And for many people, what starts happening at that point is some of the worst, even worse than what happened in the relationship, especially if you're the one who's ending the relationship. And even to the person who just asked that question about feeling confused and still very much in that confused, very acutely traumatized sort of phase of this relationship, is that post-separation abuse is something that contributes to that, right? And the post-separation abuse can many times be sort of a re-triggering of what you went through in the relationship. So you're trying to heal, and yet all of that rawness you're feeling, you don't get to feel safe. Now, it must feel like a relief to not have to live with someone like this anymore, right? So your physical space feels like more of a sanctuary, but now they found a way to puncture this electronic space of yours, which we are so reliant on, right? There's a couple of ways. I mean, ranging from legal solutions to unfortunately, like constantly having to build and rebuild your communication structures, you said that once upon a time, engaging with him headlong worked for about 3 weeks and then it didn't. In general, that doesn't tend to work. In a way, it's almost like they know they are getting at you. If it's a legal threat, I mean, some people would go so far as to send a cease and desist, and as long as you have the evidence to support it, because that can actually, believe it or not, for all of the kind of litigiousness of a narcissistic person, that can actually scare them, because they still do care about optics and they still do care about how they look to the world, and they may not want that as part of sort of how they're viewed. But I would definitely say, I would speak to an attorney. I have to be, you have, and what did they say?
So she said, well, even if you can prove this happening, can you technically prove it's him? And then she referred me to a cyber.
Yeah, you need a cyber attorney, yes.
They were like, not a cyber attorney, but a company that deals with like cyber protection for
Oh.
businesses. And they were kind of like, well, we don't really feel this kind of, personal. They were more like protecting
A business.
from China or whatever, hacking into businesses, but not from the personal. So they were even like, are you sure this is happening? And I'm like, yeah, it's a little gaslighting from.
Yeah, I mean, because you can play the game of the constant like block, 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 block. Right, block the number, block the this. I'll tell you this, anybody who's ever been through a narcissistic relationship, you can never answer an unknown phone number again. Never. I mean, ever again. Like, I mean, short of it being like you, and this is why I literally say, if you're going to call me, I need your number, because I'm not answering. Because for years I had gone through that kind of post-separation abuse, and it was horrifying. And the problem is then it also makes you you feel like you can't work anymore because you don't feel comfortable checking your own inbox. And so just checking your inbox starts giving you a sense of a panicky feeling. And that, it really is difficult, because then you have to you're constantly sort of putting out these fires, and you are speaking to sort of a legal hole. There are attorneys out there that specialize in just this, but I'm going to be frank with you. I had gone through a stalking case myself, and it was in the last few years, and it was getting dangerous. The person was making more and more serious threats towards me. I was shocked when I spoke to the local police, and they said, not high enough here. And I'm like, how bad does this have to get? It was terrible. It ended up actually having massive ramifications for my professional life in so many ways. I developed, it was awful. I developed health problems, the whole 9 yards. And so, but this person who's literally threatening to do physical harm to me. And the only path forward was to get a restraining order, which we knew was going to inflame this person more. So we definitely protect perpetrators more than we protect people being stalked. Our system is set up to protect the people who are harming people, not the people on the other side. We really do not, because it's all about, well, you have to have enough, you have to have enough evidence. And so when then somebody's finally dead, like, whoa, whoops, sorry, we missed that. So I would document. I would, if confronting has worked in the past, you could try that again. You may be able to find an attorney who could write some form of cease and desist. That might stop them, but it could also inflame them further. You can also play the game of setting up new accounts where you give those to people close to you, setting up the new number, leaving the old number for them to text, and then getting the new number, and then so then they feel like their messages are going through. It means you have to pay for a second phone line, so it starts adding up. So it depends on the nature of the relationship and the level of dangerousness as well, but you want to save all of this evidence. I empathize with you, because being in this situation, I was shocked at what I was told was the level that this would have to reach for me to be able to get protected myself. And I thought, oh my God, it was unreal to me. And I was told by law enforcement and by the local DA's office that you don't have enough. So I do, but those are the things I would suggest. But and keep in mind your own safety. If you're not in physical danger, in acute physical danger, but this is just sort of that ongoing harassment campaign, and you can try to play whack-a-mole with it and then create new accounts and keep the old ones up so they can keep stalking you through the old accounts, but you don't check them. Yeah, they call them your stalky accounts. Yeah.
All right. I know. We have so many questions, but we have reached the end of this.
Can we do one more?
You want to do one more?
One more.
Okay.
Hi. I start every day with you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I don't want to start every day with me, so I really appreciate that.
No, but it's. I'm not gonna lie. It's hard because I know whatever you say. I'll be honest. Some days I'm like, she's gonna say something I've heard before, and I always learn something new every single time I listen to you. Anyway, thank you. I am in one of my mother's, the narcissist. I'm 52. She's 81. She had a really bad fall in July, and she was in the hospital, rehab. Now she's in assisted living. She's getting better. She's going to go live on her own again. I'm in the process of trying to radically accept, but I am also in the process of trying to, as you said in your email today, move the focus from the narcissist, from her to me. Mm-hmm. I'm in therapy with a somewhat trauma-informed therapist. But what I'm finding is I'm still hung up on the self-loathing of my behavior with her, the things, the way that I act, and that I don't do with other people. I'm just not able to figure out how to stop the way I react, and therefore the self-loathing. I know that's really a lot to ask here. I don't know if you have anything I should broach with my therapist about how to move through that. Or if I don't know. I don't know how in the world to get past that self-loathing and also to move the shift from
Okay.
her to me.
I
Sorry.
hear you. I mean, what you just said is everyone who has an aging narcissistic parent, right? Because they go from being, you were a little kid and they were fearsome and awful, and now they're old and fragile and kind of pathetic, right? And they fall and they get sick and they get dementia and all that stuff. And we, in our very expectable reactions to them, our normal reactions to them, we feel like we're bad people. Remember, the origin of this relationship was predicated on you being a bad person. We become the shame repository for the narcissistic parent. They project all their shame onto the child. The child has to carry it. You're bad, you're selfish, you're difficult, you're demanding. You got in the way of me having the life I wanted to have. I do so much for you. I put a roof over your head. You're bad. That was the origin of the damn relationship, right? That was the asymmetry. So you got used to that. What happens, and again, even to the woman who was talking about, I don't feel like I still feel very destabilized in this relationship. We have trauma, we have sympathetic nervous system reactions when we don't feel safe. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, submit. We have no control over these folks. We are not sitting there saying, all right, I'm feeling like a flight day today. We just do what we do, right? And when I hear that you're having reactions that you look back on and say, oh, I don't like that, I hear a couple of things happening. Number one, you're having that fight response, right? You're having that, and I actually like that version. What's your name? I like that version of Liz, right? That is a self-preserving part of Liz. But the difficulty with the Liz who's basically like, step the hell off, okay? The difficulty with that is it actually keeps Liz stuck in this relationship with her. Because as long as self-loathing Liz is in the house, self-loathing Liz is always having to go back, and in some ways in this very contrite and almost complicit way. So we start to feel we're as bad as them, so now we're caught in the toxic dance, right? But understand that that's a natural fight response. Also to the person who said, you're having trouble feeling stable. I want you to really think about what that sympathetic nervous system response is in you. I'm sorry, my wrist is vibrating, it's reminding me. Think about what that fight, flight, freeze, what is happening in you, because it's designed to keep you safe, but in an interesting way, it's also designed to keep you in attachment. Right? So simply understanding what the function of that reaction is can help you feel sort of like, oh, I see what's happening, and you're not bad. A reaction is a reaction, especially when we feel threatened. And it's information we can take in and we can understand, oh, that's why I'm doing that. When I think of how many of you have had the fawn response in these relationships, trying to win them over, trying to say the nice things, trying to ooh and ah, you're not doing that deliberately. It was the only way for you to have a relationship with them, whether it's an adult relationship or a child relationship. And then we look back and we feel as though we're complicit. I was the gross one. I was the one doing this. Maybe I built them up. No, you were staying safe. So if you can see that fight, Liz, is actually a healthy part of Liz that's actually saying, this isn't okay. I like the fight part of the response because it's like, this is unjust. But then address that piece that's leaving you in this dance with her, because that fight makes sense, and be gentle with that part of you because it's actually kind of advocating for you. And instead of getting pissed off at that part of yourself, say, thanks for being my bodyguard and advocate. Because that's a very expectable response to somebody who harmed you, who should have cared for you. And we expect this superhuman ability in ourselves to be empathic and compassionate to a person who has never shown us that. That asymmetry doesn't work. So let's embrace Fighty Liz, because she's actually a strong part of yourself, but understand that that's keeping you in this complicit loop, but you're not. You are just trying to keep you alive despite the constant invalidation of this relationship. And this is going to be a rougher ride, Liz, as she gets older. The number of you who are going to struggle with older, aging, narcissistic parents, this is the next mess a lot of people are facing, is how do you show up with these parents without feeling a sense of guilt. So, I'm sorry, did someone say something? I heard It's so funny. Are you psychic? My publisher just sent me an email and said, we need the family book. And I'm like, I'm so tired. But I'm like, okay, maybe from your mouth to God's ears, maybe I'll write that book. So thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to leave you with one last piece here. I'm watching healing happen all the time. I am watching people slowly but surely giving power to their voice, and they're doing the things that they want. Some people are writing books. Some people are going back to school and becoming therapists. Some people are just, again, I'm hoping the woman in the back of the room might start a group that would support people who are going through these sorts of situations and can't get out. But every day I'm seeing this happen. I'm seeing people who were in 50-year marriages leaving and finally living alone for the first time in their lives, and are saying, I never dreamed my body could feel this sort of settled. So people do find their voices. And the last piece I want to leave you with, because I think it's such an important piece of this, is that forgiveness piece. I always come back to this because of pressure so many people feel, especially when it's an elderly parent who's falling, or cultural demands on a marriage or something like that, is I feel like I'm a bad person for not forgiving, okay? When you forgive someone, you are giving a divine and sacred part of yourself. And in a narcissistic relationship, I can all but guarantee they're going to take your forgiveness and they're going to turn it into permission to do it again. And number two, they feel entitled to your forgiveness. It will not make you heal better. And a lot of people say, well, maybe I'm the bad one because I won't forgive, or I don't see their backstory. Put them aside and put your healing in the front seat. None of us can be the therapist of our partner, our parent, our sibling, or even our adult child. And it is very hard to step out of ourselves long enough to say, I deserve to care for myself. I'm going to support fighting Liz. I am going to support that child in me that wasn't parented. And remember, all really to me mindfulness is, we talk about mindfulness. Do you know what mindfulness is? It's for the first time having that attuned parent, but you're attuning to yourself in that moment and listening to your body, and finally just being that safe place for you to land. Try to create at least a moment of that each day. To the person who said, again, you're in a marriage and you feel dysregulated, just imagine yourself parenting yourself for a moment and how you would lovingly care for yourself, because that's what we lost out in these relationships, no matter at what point they entered our lives. I know it gets better. It's never, but we do carry these core wounds. And with the world being the mess it is, we get re-triggered simply by what's happening in the world. So we not only have to draw into community, we have to be kinder to ourselves. But people heal, and as people find their authentic voices, I'm seeing amazing, amazing things happen. It's finally we spoke truth to what these oppressions look like. So please promise me you'll take yourselves back. Thank you.
All right, we're going to say bye to Dr. Ramani for a few minutes, and there will be a signing. Don't worry, we're just going to move her before the chaos starts, before all of you get out of your seats. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all feel better prepared to be the fighting person you needed when you were a kid. All right, thank you all so much. Peace and love from Busboys and Poets. For those of you tuning in online, we love you, thank you. And to everyone here, thank you all so much.